And this new lecture, if you want, in terms of numbering, in terms of the topic, is about, or is linking, it's going back to something we have been talking about already, namely production and forms of capital. We continue from something we did before. We are extending our understanding of it. There is this little guy there in the Christian tradition chasing us towards growth, towards money, chasing us to get more and more and more, but at the same time showing us the problem of it. That the question is, what does it actually mean to follow this stripe, and what is the positive or the negative effect of it? And usually this links back to GDP actually. We say money, having more money, being wealthier in terms of money, it is good. And we do not really think about what this money is about. And I saw this as well in the China Daily, the headline reading, China leads ranks of Asia billionaires, the study funds. It does not talk about, and this is the point why I put it up here, it does not talk about capital. It talks about money. The wealth of money, how much money do we have? It doesn't talk about what, if we need it, what we can do with it, and it definitely does not talk about, and this is the most important part, the fact that money does not equal capital. We can have money as much as we want. It does not mean anything in terms of capital. It means, of course, something in terms of the process of the capital market economy, because if we have money, we can spend it, and in this way it goes into the market, it is important, but at the same time, it doesn't produce anything. Important to understand it, again, the historical development, it's from the original exchange of goods. I have this, you have that, and we exchange it. Goods immediately relating to each other. Using, to ease this process, to make it easier, to make it possible as well, not only between two individuals, easing it by looking at money as a means to helping us to do this transaction. Money in this term simply functioning as well, and not least, as a means of transaction, as an intermediary measure, representation of the value. As such, it doesn't have value. Voltaire said something at some stage, the value of money will come back to its real essential value, and this is zero. Of course, there is some money, some value if you have coins, there is metal value in it. Depending on the quality and whatsoever, you may have actually quite a lot of value in it. And this was the origin of it. You have had a valuable metal, and this was used for the exchange. Because if you didn't get anything, you have had the piece of metal, and this was valuable. In terms of the metal, it was. Sometimes, actually, you did have other goods being used as money being used for this transfer. And sometimes things we would not consider today as being relevant. Salt is one of them. Using salt as currency, using salt to transact, because it was a very valuable thing. You could store it to some extent, actually for a long time, and you could use it then for the exchange process. Now, we are not talking about money here, but we are talking about the idea, the goal of this economic process, and it's not, from some stage onwards, it is not about exchanging use value, using money as means to make it easier, but it is about this little fellow there, the additional value, the additional commodities we want to get out of it. So we want to get more out of this process of exchange. Now we have, at some stage, the relationship completely changing, and we have money that we want. We don't want to have more commodities, but we want to have more money. Even if it's now the money that is at the end, the beginning and the end, the money is the central element. This is what we are looking for. We are looking for more money at the end of this process. For the majority, it's simply income in form of wages, salaries. For the others, it's profit, rent, interest, capital gains, and royalties, depending on where and how we invest it. What actually happens with this process of how we invest this money. Implicitly, this means that ideally we end up with what we have been talking about already, that we don't have simply the money, but we understand the value of money not in terms of the use value anymore, but in terms of this addictive process. We want to have more and more and more and more, independent of its use value, independent of what we do with it, independent as well of its meaning for the social, societal contribution, but simply with the aim, with the core idea of getting more. Economically, it means we are talking about concentration and centralization. Concentration, we talked about it briefly already, is that the investment needed for the production is changing. I said today at some stage we have the individuals, the equal individuals. On the market they are equals, and they exchange on this basis of equality. Now, the one definite inequality is that between the owner of means of production and the worker. Industrialization was exactly this expropriation of small owners before, and the beginning of the concentration of the means of production, of the property of means of production. Only one owned it and employed the other. Fundamental inequality, although on the market they had been facing each other as equals. Nobody was forced to do anything. You have had the equal right. You could accept the job, but you didn't have to. You have had the equal bargaining power in a way, at least formally. So in this way, equality, but at the same time, of course, factually not. Now there is the same between looking at two producers. Equality. This is the point of departure, ideally at least. You have a certain amount of money, and this is the minimum you need to start a business. Depending, of course, on the kind of business. You may do the business on your own, and you have to get a computer, and you have to get a car, and you have to get some gardening tools. Because you want to do the gardening for people as a service, so you need the equipment, you need the tools, and you need a computer to link to advertising, to do the accounting, and all that. So this is, we all start with this. It's like any board game, we are all starting at the same position. But now, it happens that one is better, for different reasons this can happen, in the competition. Performing better. So you have at point 2 in time, you don't have equals anymore, but you have the one here still doing the business, the small business, and doing it, and being able to do it. But you have here somebody who is better, who is more competitive. For different reasons. Can happen for different reasons. Now, what you have is that, of course, here, this person is not only in an advantageous position of being better, but as well, process of accumulation, can invest this being better on this level into the next round of production. Very much simplified by a second computer, or actually you don't need the second computer necessarily, buy some more tools, gardening tools, and employ somebody. Going on and going on, if you are then again better, because you start already with a better equipment or with somebody who works for you, you are in the third round again in a better position, because then, let's assume it's in tier 3, still the first one didn't move any way upwards, but actually the second one moved again further upwards, not staying on the same level, but in relation being again better. This means that this process of concentration, considering there are so many gardens to be made, to be looked after in the city or in this area, this person does more and more of this work, does more and more orders, whereas this is just doing small business. So concentration in this sense, building up an enterprise, a huge gardening service, and at the end of the day you can see this, you still have the small bakery shops, the small butchers, the small vegetable stalls actually somewhere, and you have the supermarket. And the supermarket is this one. And the supermarket will grow further in terms of concentration. having the better point of departure and improving the point of departure for the subsequent roles. So this is relevant as a matter of concentration. And then the second part that is important is centralization. Let's construct this. You have the supermarket. You started with your little butcher shop or vegetable stand. Then you got into, I don't know what, let's say you added, starting with meat, then you have had vegetables. Then you have had bread. Then you have had, I don't know what. And you have finally a supermarket where you can buy more or less everything. It's as well, you may say, it's centralization in terms of doing more different kinds of business under one roof. And I saw this recently somewhere on an airport, wherever in German-speaking airport, advertisements of an airline, Vietnam Airlines. And of course this is not really the perfect example, but it shows where it goes, that they advertise not with their core business of bringing you from A to B. This is what an airline does, right? This is their business. But now they are pretending that really important is that they have an excellent cuisine. This is what it means. Küche der Spitzenklasse, excellent cuisine. They advertise with a restaurant service. There are so many airlines that can bring you from A to B. But there's only one airline, apparently, that has as well this excellent restaurant service. Now, I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's really exceptional good. But I know that usually I would not change my flight time, or I would not pay 100, 200 euro more just to get a good meal on a flight from A to B. Having said this, it is amazing how much people pay for, I don't know what, business class and business super class and first class. You have different ranks there, or even to have more legroom in your own economy place. So it is always something where things matter, not necessarily in absolute terms, but in relative terms. There are some airlines, actually, I was using them, I was happy with them, but where other people say, actually, I would not use it. I would not go with them. For whatever reason, sometimes it may be justified. There are some airlines actually are trying to avoid at least. But there are some airlines which I think are excellent. I can't say the name here. But actually the reputation of this airline is extremely bad. Many people saying, I would never ever fly with them. The reason for it is they have a bad reputation from the history. They have been very good, very bad in performance. I never ever have had such a spacious airline as that one in question. So it is difficult to change the image, and this is as well part of the concentration. You say, I can do what everybody in this business can do, but I actually offer more or better than the other. And part of it is what I offer more is what I offer in addition to the core business, in this case of transport. Now we move on with something that is more or less linked to technicalities, where we have to learn something that is going on in the economic process. This is one of the core core concepts, if you want. Indirectly, at least, we talked about it. I mentioned it, I think, as well directly. Marginality and the law of diminishing marginal utility. Important is, although we talk about this marginality as apparently objective aspect of just a figure we can measure, law of diminishing marginal utility and of diminishing marginal utility, meaning there are goods, there are commodities involved. But it is important to keep in mind as well that linked to the concept of utility, there's always the aspect of individual valuation. If you look back, if you remember the utility function was very much about your perception of your individual preferences. What do you want? What do you value? It is not objectively given. In some ways it is given as an objective measure. There are certain goods, certain things you need. You simply cannot live without them. Not for a long time. There are as well some things, again and again coming up, you may not need them in absolute terms, but you need them in a certain society. Actually, it may be that you personally prefer not to have them. But living in this society, whichever, at this time, you need them. It's the social standard. I was cycling for many years to work, which was about 25 kilometers back. I really enjoyed it. It was a great time. And then a friend of mine from the village actually said to me one day, actually, do you know what the people are talking about you? I think you are mad. You are mad, you are doing a stupid thing you shouldn't do, you should go by car, or you are poor, and who wants to be mad, and who wants to be seen as being poor? So, you buy a car, this is the standard, you need a car, and then you show off. Social standards, marginality, utility, it is an individual decision. I decided to be seen as mad. It was great. Nobody did any harm to me. But it was not the proper thing to do. And at the same time, you nevertheless have this individual part of it, the individual preference. And there's something you can do, you don't have to do. And there is no social aspect going hand in hand with it in terms of stigmatization, in terms of reputation or whatsoever. It is about individual preferences when it comes to consumption. I mentioned in the other lecture this example of going to a restaurant, eating a fancy meal, something you didn't have for a long time anymore, and you are really looking forward to this, getting again this on your table, on your plate in front of you. And the first bite will have this effect of, this is great. I really love this. I love the taste, I love everything. And I love it in this restaurant because they are really good in preparing. And then the second bite is really still great. And then there is the third, and you think, actually, there's something else. There's a bowl with something different. I'll take this one. And at some stage, there are two dimensions of saturation. At some stage, you are simply saturated in terms of full. You can't eat anything more. If you do so, it will make you sick. So you stop. And it's not this one point where you eat and eat and eat and then full stop. But it is a process where every additional thing you eat makes you fuller and fuller and gives you this feeling. First, after starving, you say, I can do a little bit more. And at some stage, you say, well, not really. I'm sitting here, I'll take another bite because I'm still sitting here. And at some stage, you simply stop. You stay with the people there and others eat, but you aren't. The other point is the saturation in terms of the satisfaction. As I said, your most favorable dish, you didn't have it for a long time. It's really great, the first bite. And it's again this diminishing marginal utility. The added value, if you want, the added satisfaction is decreasing. It still is okay, it's still good to get it, but the addition, come back to the growth idea, the additional value is not there anymore. So simply increasing input has decreasing relative output. Relative output. There is still an output, a positive output, but in relative terms, like with growth, it's getting smaller. And there we have exactly this point. It is relevant for consumption, but it is as well relevant when it comes to production. Two people can do more than one person, usually. In the garden, it may be a little bit problematic if two people use the same tool, or two people use the same machine, the lawnmower. They won't be more productive. There's only one who uses it. In some cases, it's different actually. If you have two people who are physically weak, but you have a heavy, large lawnmower, actually two people can push it, and this is more productive. The third person will definitely be in the way, not producing anything more, but this third person can clear up the lawn, something you would have to do otherwise after cutting the grass. So you have some additional value there, and you have exactly the same effect happening here, that any person additional working there, any additional raw material, any additional tool or machine will or may still have a positive effect, but in relative terms, the growth, the positive growth, the increase of the added value is getting smaller and smaller. I mentioned this one example where it's getting pretty clear, I think. The change from traditional postal services of the snail mail, there was a huge development when it came to the fax. This was just an amazing increase of what happened there. And then you have had the email, which gives us the impression this is so much faster. But in relative terms, the progress made from snail by fax related to snail mail was much, much larger. In our perception, the perception doesn't matter. What is relevant is what we can measure in this case. This happens with many things. Machines today, the additional productivity is, of course, in many cases there, and it is relevant. But in relative terms, it is diminishing. This is what this law of diminishing marginality, marginal utility, is about. You still have a gain, an additional gain, but actually it is getting smaller and smaller. Everything more you do is still adding something, but it is adding less. And they did this on purpose because the lesson is over now and will continue next week, I think. Enjoy the weekend, enjoy the week. Think about the